Have you ever felt the pull of an unspoken connection so intense it defied logic? A story of passion, secrets, and uncharted emotions begins with a quiet cafe meeting, but takes a turn into the unexpected. A journey that will leave you questioning the very nature of intimacy and boundaries. Let me take you back to where it all started. After a while, I was exhausted from the pace and intensity, and my legs were shaking, but I didn't care, because I was so close to the finish line, as if they understood how I felt. They both wanted to walk away at the same time, but I spit the soul out of my mouth and shouted, "Let's go," and their voices suddenly got louder. The vibrations I had been experiencing up until that point gave way to a sip of joy, and I felt like I was having a seizure. The rest, though, was something you never expected. So let me start from the beginning. It started at the cafe where we met frequently, and the first time I really noticed them both together was on a quiet afternoon where the sun was frequently reflecting, his gaze lingering on me in a way that made me feel vulnerable, but not uncomfortable. And through the windows that painted everything gold, he sat in front of me, always serene and steady, a presence I could feel without having to hear it. Julian on. The other hand was at my side with his typical cheerful smile, but I could feel the tension underneath his relaxed attitude. We had always been like this. A soft brush of fingers under the table made me freeze. I hadn't seen whose hand it was, but I felt its warmth, the slow, purposeful pressure that made my heart stutter. And then it was gone. But the feeling lingered like an electric pulse. I couldn't shake. 3 pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together but somehow made sense when we were together. But this time there was something different. The atmosphere between us was charged, with a possibility we hadn't yet dared to explore. Elias would find a way to get a little closer at first, his hand brushing my shoulder as we walked side by side. Then, as if AC was a coincidence, Daring would playfully grab my wrist and pull me towards him. But I could feel the difference, the intimacy, that had never existed before now simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't until the night we met, in the garden, that everything came to Ethi. Air was cooler than usual, and the garden, lit only by the soft glow of lanterns, felt secluded and private-like. A world of its own. I walked between the meek step, bringing me closer to the inevitable. My fingers twitching at my sides, wanting to touch them both, but I held back, fearing that any move might upset the delicate balance we had. His eyes were darker than normal, yet they were intense enough to send a chill down my spine. He didn't say anything, and the silent draw between us said it all. Elias watched from a bit farther back as usual. His presence was quieter but no less powerful. He didn't move as fast as Julian did. But when he got to me, his hand was steady and composed, and in some way his fingers touched my wrist, sending a sensation of warmth up my arm. Julian was the first to close the distance. His fingers grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward him with a possessiveness that surprised me. There wasn't much room between us. His lips explored my neck as though you were going to reveal something private. He was memorizing the information. His hand slid down, and I allowed it to. Elias's touch was different. It was softer but no less intense. His hands moved over my arms, almost respectfully, following the lines of my body as if he didn't want to hurt me. He pulled me close, but there was no rush or sense of urgency. Instead, he was savoring the moment and letting it unfold at its own pace. It felt like he was mapping my neck, sending chills down my spine. I'm not sure how, but all of a sudden I felt pressed between them, their bodies enveloping me in a warmth that made my head spin. Julian was demanding, firm and confident, as he explored, his hand slipping down as though he were looking for something and caressing my package in a way that alarmed me. It was impossible to concentrate on anything else. As Elias moved behind me with his typical composed strength, and his hands were softly on my shoulders, pushing me toward him, I could feel the warmth of his body on my back, and the warmth of his breath as his fingers slid into the pots. Every part of me felt alive and overwhelmed with sensation. I wanted more. Did our voices and breathing were mixing together. We moved together as if we had done it 1,000 times. Before my body was trembling instinctively, we were suddenly intertwined in a dance of passion that was both familiar and new. Instead of 3 people, we were like one person. There was no hesitation anymore, no wondering what it all meant. It was just, it had to. Beast's hands moved downward, circling the edge of the package as if he knew where they were going. He didn't want everything to happen at once. And that only made me more furious every time he pretended to open the package. It sent sparks of heat through my body. The feeling took my breath away and I leaned toward him, losing control of myself, as if asking for help. I felt a bulge there. This was the turning point I could no longer resist. I leaned forward and relaxed, so that I could work more comfortably. I knew he couldn't resist the package, and the pose plant emerged quickly, as if it had seen the sun and found its way. It seemed to take everything from me as it moved back and forth. Everything I didn't know, I wanted to give it, was like a vacuum. The contact urgent and possessive, as if it couldn't wait another second. My eyes caught Julian's plant for a moment. It looked beauty and well-tended there. It was an edible plant. I wondered what it tasted like. I wanted everyone to be happy, so I brought it to my mouth to taste. The sounds were so mixed up that I couldn't tell whose voice was coming from, where I was sure our voices were going out of the garden. But I didn't care. I'm sure you wouldn't mind either. But I was overcome with more than simply the plant's warmth. I couldn't recall where one touch ended and the other started because of the way their hands moved. It was like they had choreographed each touch. They had become a part of me as I attempted to get them and my plants closer together. I felt as though every movement was in unison with mine, leading to something more that I couldn't identify, but knew I needed eventually. Every movement, every contact part of the same rhythm. The same longing as if there wasn't enough space. My legs were shaking from the intensity and the pace, but I didn't care because I was so close to the finish line that it seemed like they understood how I was feeling. They both reached their limits at the same time and wanted to pull away, but I spat the plant out of my mouth and yelled, "Come on!" Their voices suddenly became louder, and the vibrations I had been feeling up until that point gave way to a barrage of joy. The world seemed to stop, spinning, as I felt as though I was having a seizure, and my legs were trembling when it was over, when the heat had finally subsided, and the world had returned to its normal rhythm. We were entwined on the soft grass of the garden. My body ached, my package throbbed, and I was relieved and pleased, but I still wanted more. It felt like I was floating, lost in the space between them, lost in the contact of warmth flowing from my mouth and between the pots. They were not mine, but the heat flowing from the package was all mine. I held the plants in each hand and used one to divert their attention, while using the other to observe the stars. I could feel their warmth on either side of me. In the ensuing silence, their presence served as a fur maker. I ran my fingers along the edge of Julian's hand, amazed at how effortless it felt. Elias's hand then moved naturally down my arm, his fingers lightly passing through mine, and I couldn't help but smile here. We were 3 lives intertwined, no longer bound by the unspoken fears or the WFs that had previously held us back. We didn't talk. There were no words for what had just transpired. No explanations were required. We just lay there as the night stretches out around us. Our breathing slows down like an unraveling vine. I realized then that this was more than just a story or a brief connection. Rather, it was something deeper and more profound that would keep coming to light with every second that went by, until we were unable to recall where we had ended and they had started. And for the first time, I felt completely and permanently whole as the night wrapped its cool arms around us. We lay there in a silence that spoke louder than words. Our tangled paths, once uncertain, now felt destined. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a revelation of who we truly were. But what happens next when emotions this powerful collide with the world outside the garden? Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. My beautiful listeners and viewers, how did you find the story of this woman who, despite being married, ended up with 2 other men they satisfied her in true manner? Don't forget to share your thoughts about this in the comments. And if you enjoyed the story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'll be waiting for your feedback. No matter which country you're from, you all are respectful to me. So, I love you all. Thank you.